The German Shepherd that died 4 years ago just exposed the most shocking conspiracy in medical history. At 12 a.m. on a Monday night in Millbrook, security cameras captured 47 seconds of footage that would expose a conspiracy spanning 4 years, 7 states, and dozens of missing children. Thunder, a German Shepherd with police badge K90847, walked calmly through the emergency entrance of St. Catherine's Hospital. In his mouth, a newborn baby girl barely clinging to life. The problem? Thunder had been euthanized in 2019 after his handler, Officer Michael Santos, died in what was ruled an accidental fall. The bigger problem? The baby was wrapped in a blanket from a hospital department that had been destroyed 3 years earlier. As medical staff worked to save the infant's life, Thunder took position outside the trauma room like a sentinel guarding state secrets, because that's exactly what he was doing. For 4 years, this dead dog had been hiding in the wilderness, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to expose medical experiments that would make your blood run cold. What he uncovered beneath that hospital will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, loyalty, and evil hiding in plain sight. The fluorescent lights in the security office hummed their monotonous tune, casting harsh shadows across Jake Morrison's weathered face as he slumped deeper into his worn leather chair. At 53, Jake had seen enough night shifts at St. Catherine's Hospital to know that Monday nights in Millbrook were usually as eventful as watching paint dry. The coffee in his styrofoam cup had gone cold hours ago, leaving a bitter film on his tongue that matched his mood perfectly. Millbrook, population 8,047, according to the faded welcome sign at the town limits, was the kind of place where the most exciting annual event was still the Pumpkin Festival, where Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning squash made front-page news in the Millbrook Gazette. Nothing dramatic ever happened here. Nothing that would make Jake's heart race or his hands shake. That's exactly how he liked it. Monitor 3 flickered suddenly, pulling his attention from the crossword puzzle he'd been half-heartedly attempting. The emergency entrance camera caught movement, a shadow shifting between the bare November trees that bordered the hospital's rear parking lot. Jake rubbed his eyes with the backs of his hands, wondering if the cheap coffee and fluorescent glare were finally getting to him after all these years. Then he saw it. A massive German Shepherd emerged from and what looked like dried blood, but its eyes, even through the grainy security footage, held an intelligence that made Jake lean forward in his chair. But it wasn't the dog that made his blood run cold. It was what the animal carried so carefully in its powerful jaws, a bundle, small, wrapped in what appeared to be blue fabric, dangling slightly with each of the dog's careful steps. Jake's first thought was that some stray had killed a raccoon or opossum. Wouldn't be the first time he'd seen nature's brutal side play out on these monitors. But as the German Shepherd approached the automatic doors of the emergency entrance, the bundle moved, not the lifeless sway of dead weight, but the unmistakable stirring of something alive. The automatic doors sensed the dog's approach and slid open with their familiar mechanical whisper. The German Shepherd paused for just a moment at the threshold, as if considering the magnitude of what it was about to do, then stepped purposefully into the sterile brightness of the hospital's emergency entrance. Jake Morrison, who had witnessed heart attacks in the parking lot, domestic violence calls that ended in bloodshed, and even a woman giving birth in the back seat of a Honda Civic, found himself rubbing his eyes again. This couldn't be real. Dogs didn't rescue babies. Dogs didn't walk into hospitals carrying human infants like some kind of four-legged paramedic. But as he watched the impossible scene unfold on his monitor, Jake realized with growing horror that the bundle in the dog's mouth wasn't just moving, it was a baby. A real, living, breathing human baby, wrapped in torn blue fabric that looked suspiciously like hospital linens. His hands trembled as he reached for the emergency phone, his 47 years of relatively uneventful life suddenly feeling inadequate preparation for whatever was about to happen next. Sarah Mitchell had seen it all in her 16 years as head nurse in St. Catherine's emergency room. At 42, with steel gray streaks threading through her auburn hair and laugh lines that had deepened into permanent fixtures around her green eyes, she carried herself with the confident authority of someone who had held dying strangers in her arms and watched miracles happen on Tuesday afternoons. She'd cleaned blood from a man who'd superglued his hand to his forehead during a drunken bet. She'd delivered a baby in the hospital parking lot during a blizzard when the roads were too treacherous for an ambulance. She'd talked down suicidal teenagers and held the hands of elderly patients taking their final breaths. Nothing surprised Sarah Mitchell anymore, until tonight. The automatic doors of the emergency entrance slid open with their familiar soft hiss, and what walked through defied every category of crisis Sarah had mentally catalogued over the years. A German shepherd, massive, matted, and moving with the white linoleum of the ER. Water dripped steadily from its dark coat, leaving a trail of muddy paw prints that would normally have sent Sarah reaching for the mop bucket, and a lecture about tracking dirt through her pristine emergency room. But Sarah Mitchell didn't reach for anything except the edge of the triage desk to steady herself. The night shift froze, as if someone had pressed pause on their entire world. Dr. Peterson, who had been reviewing a chart with his usual half-distracted efficiency, dropped his clipboard. The metallic clatter echoed through the sudden silence like a gunshot. Jenny Martinez, the newest intern, who still jumped at loud noises and apologized for everything, gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Even Carlos, the night janitor, who had been methodically mopping the far corner of the waiting area, stopped mid-stroke and stared. The German shepherd approached the triage desk with military precision, each step calculated and purposeful. Sarah could see the intelligence in its amber eyes, the way it assessed the room, the people, the situation. This wasn't a confused or frightened animal. This was a creature with a mission. Gently, almost reverently, the dog lowered its massive head and placed its burden on the cold linoleum floor. Then, as if all the strength had suddenly drained from its body, the German shepherd collapsed beside the bundle, tongue lolling out, flanks heaving with exhaustion. But its eyes, those remarkable, intelligent eyes, remained alert, watchful, protective. Sarah's maternal instincts overrode 16 years of protocol and procedure. She found herself moving before her brain had fully processed what she was seeing, dropping to her knees beside the shivering bundle on the floor. Her hands, steady from years of emergency medicine, carefully peeled back the torn blue fabric. A baby, a real, living, breathing baby girl. The infant couldn't have been more than 3 days old, Sarah estimated, taking in the still-attached umbilical cord remnant, the waxy vernix still coating parts of her tiny body. 5 pounds, maybe less. The baby's skin had the grayish pallor of severe hypothermia, and Sarah could see the telltale signs of dehydration in the way the infant's skin tented when touched. But she was alive. Her tiny chest rose and fell with the rapid, shallow breathing of the newborn, and her perfect little fingers curled and uncurled with the involuntary movements that spoke of a functioning nervous system. "Get me warming blankets and an IV setup," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Now!" Dr. Peterson moved toward them, his medical bag already in hand. But the German shepherd's low, rumbling growl stopped him in his tracks. Away. This wasn't just an animal that had found a baby. This was a guardian who had delivered his most precious charge to the only place he knew could help her. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're going to take good care of her. You did good. You did so good." As Dr. Elena Rodriguez took charge of the baby's immediate medical care, Sarah found herself studying the torn blue fabric that had served as the infant's blanket. The material was coarse, institutional, and faded from repeated washings. But it was the small printed tag in the corner that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. St. Catherine's Pediatric Wing was printed in small black letters on a white label that had yellowed with age. The problem was simple and terrifying. St. Catherine's Pediatric Wing had burned down in 2020 during the COVID lockdowns. Sarah remembered that terrible week when smoke had filled the corridors and they'd evacuated every patient, every piece of equipment, every scrap of fabric. The wing had been completely destroyed, reduced to charred rubble and bitter memories. The blanket in her hands shouldn't exist. Dr. Peterson, emboldened by the German shepherd's apparent acceptance of Sarah, carefully examined the dog's collar while the animal's attention was focused on the baby's soft cries. The leather was worn and cracked, but the metal nameplate was still legible. "Police dog, retired," followed by a badge number that had been partially scratched away by years of wear. K90847. "Jake," Sarah called to the security guard who had appeared in the doorway, still clutching his emergency phone. "Can you run this badge number through the system?" Jake Morrison's fingers flew over his computer keyboard with uncharacteristic urgency. The database search seemed to take forever, the cursor blinking mockingly as they waited for answers that might explain the impossible scene playing out in their emergency room. The results made Jake's face go white. "Thunder," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "German Shepherd. Handler. Officer Michael Santos. Status." Jake's voice broke. "Status. Euthanized. 2019. The silence in the emergency room was deafening. Thunder. Because now they knew his name had officially been put down 4 years ago. Yet here he stood, very much alive, having delivered a baby wrapped in fabric from a hospital wing that had been destroyed 3 years ago. Dr. Rodriguez worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize the baby, inserting a tiny IV line and wrapping the infant in warming blankets that would gradually bring her body temperature back to normal. But even as she focused on her medical duties, Elena couldn't shake the growing sense that this rescue was connected to something much larger and more sinister than a simple case of an abandoned infant. Thunder positioned himself outside the trauma room like a sentry, his massive body blocking the doorway, as if he understood that his job wasn't finished. Every few minutes, he would lift his grizzled muzzle and release a sound that was part howl, part whine, a haunting call that echoed through the hospital corridors with an almost supernatural resonance. Sarah stared at the impossible records on Jake's computer screen, her mind racing through the implications. A dog that should have been dead 4 years ago, a baby wrapped in fabric that should have been destroyed 3 years ago, and somewhere in the darkness, beyond the hospital walls, answers waited to a mystery that was just beginning to unfold. Thunder's haunting howl rose again, reverberating through the sterile corridors of St. Catherine's Hospital. It was the sound of a creature calling for someone who would never come, mourning for a handler who had died under circumstances that were beginning to seem far more suspicious than anyone had ever imagined. As Sarah looked into Thunder's intelligent, amber eyes, she realized with growing dread that this impossible night was only the beginning. Whatever secrets lay buried in Millbrook's recent past, Thunder had returned from the dead to make sure they finally came to light. And the baby girl, sleeping peacefully in the trauma room, the child Thunder had risked everything to save, might be the key to uncovering a conspiracy that had cost at least one good man his life. The shrill ring of Isabella Santos's cell phone shattered the quiet of her small house on Maple Street at exactly 2:30 a.m., jolting her from the restless sleep that had become her norm since moving back to Millbrook. At 24, Isabella had grown accustomed to late-night emergencies, working as a veterinary technician at downtown Millbrook's only animal clinic meant that panicked pet owners didn't always wait for business hours, but something about this particular ring felt different, more urgent, laden with a weight that made her stomach clench even before she answered. "Isabella." Sheriff Tom Bradley's voice cracked through the speaker, and she immediately knew this wasn't about Mrs. Patterson's diabetic cat or the Hendersons' arthritic German shepherd. Tom had known her since she was in diapers, had been her father's closest friend on the force, and she'd never heard his voice shake like this. "Tom? What's wrong?" She was already sitting up, her bare feet finding the cold hardwood floor of the bedroom that had been hers throughout childhood and had become hers again after her father's death. "I need you to come to St. Catherine's Hospital right now. I can't." Tom's voice faltered, and Isabella could hear him taking a deep breath. "I can't explain this over the phone. Just come. Emergency entrance." The line went dead, leaving Isabella staring at her phone in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of her father's life. The walls of the small house were covered with Michael Santos's commendations, photographs from his 20-year career. Thunder, the German shepherd who had been more than her father's partner, more than a working dog, more like a second child to the man who had raised Isabella alone after her mother's death. As Isabella threw on jeans and a sweatshirt, pulling her long dark hair into a messy ponytail, her mind raced back through memories that felt both distant and immediate. She remembered being 7 years old during a particularly violent thunderstorm, cowering under her blankets while lightning illuminated her bedroom window. Her father had been working a late shift, and she'd been alone with the babysitter when Thunder had somehow escaped from his kennel in the garage and made his way to her room. The massive German shepherd had somehow managed to open her bedroom door, something she'd never seen him do before or since, and had curled up at the foot of her bed, his warm, solid presence instantly calming her fears. "Thunder knows when his family needs him," her father had explained the next morning, ruffling the dog's ears with obvious pride. "He's not just trained to protect and serve the community, Mia. He's trained to protect and serve us." The drive to the hospital took only 8 minutes through Millbrook's empty streets, but Isabella's mind traveled much further back, to memories she'd tried to bury since her father's death 4 years ago. She remembered coming home from her sophomore year at State University to find her father changed, thinner, more paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder and jumping at unexpected sounds. She'd attributed it to the stress of police work, the natural wear and tear of 2 decades spent dealing with humanity's darker impulses. But then she'd found the files. Isabella had been looking for her birth certificate in her father's home office when she'd discovered the manila folders hidden behind his regular case files, missing children reports, adoption records that didn't match birth certificates, photographs of grieving families, and pages of handwritten notes in her father's careful script. 7 families, all from low-income households, all reporting newborn babies who had vanished under suspicious circumstances between 2018 and 2019. "Isabella," her father's voice had been sharp when he'd found her reading through the files. "Those are confidential police matters." "Dad, these families, their babies just disappeared." Michael Santos had closed the files with hands that trembled slightly, and Isabella had seen something in her father's eyes that she'd never seen before. Fear. Sometimes the system fails people, Mia. Sometimes children end up places they shouldn't be, with people who shouldn't have them. 2 weeks before his death, her father had called her at college, his voice tight with an urgency that had made her abandon her study group and find a quiet corner of the library. "If anything happens to me," he'd said without preamble, "you remember where Thunder and I used to go camping when you were little. The old shelter I built back when you were afraid of bears. You remember?" "Dad, what are you talking about? What's going to happen to you?" "Just promise me, Isabella, if anything happens to me, you know where Thunder hides in the woods. Don't let them kill him." 3 days later, Michael Santos had been found dead at the bottom of Millbrook Gorge. His body broken on the rocks 50 feet below the hiking trail he'd walked hundreds of times. The official report called it an accident, a tragic slip on wet leaves during his morning jog. But Isabella had known her father's sure-footedness, had hiked those same trails with him countless times. Michael Santos didn't slip. And when she'd received the call that Thunder was scheduled for euthanization, standard protocol for retired canine units when their handlers died, she'd been told, Isabella had made a decision that changed everything. The night before Thunder's scheduled termination, Isabella had driven to the police station and used her father's spare key to access the canine kennels. Thunder had known immediately that something was different, had followed her without question as she led him through the darkness to her father's old camping shelter deep in Millbrook Forest. A crude but weatherproof structure that Michael Santos had built years earlier when Isabella was 8, and convinced that bears would attack their tent. For 4 years, Isabella had visited Thunder weekly, bringing food, medical supplies, and the companionship of someone who had loved Michael Santos as much as she had. She'd watched the German Shepherd age, seen silver creep through his dark coat and stiffness settle into his joints. But his intelligence had never dimmed, and his loyalty had never wavered. Thunder had been waiting. For what? Isabella had never been entirely certain, until tonight. The automatic doors of St. Catherine's emergency entrance slid open, and Isabella followed the trail of muddy paw prints across the polished linoleum, with her heart hammering against her ribs. The prints were unmistakable, large, deep impressions left by paws she'd cleaned countless times, tracks she could have identified in her sleep. Thunder sat motionless outside the trauma room, positioned like a sentinel, guarding something precious. His dark coat was matted and filthy, streaked with mud and what looked like dried blood, but his posture was alert, professional, exactly as her father had trained him to be. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him 3 days ago, and there were new scars on his legs that hadn't been there before. But his amber eyes held the same intelligence, the same fierce loyalty that had made him legendary in the Millbrook Police Department. His ears perked up at the sound of her footsteps, not the general alertness of a dog hearing someone approach, but the specific recognition of someone whose scent, whose gait, whose very presence was encoded in his memory like a beloved song. "You're supposed to be dead," Isabella whispered, dropping to her knees in the sterile hospital corridor, oblivious to the stares from the medical staff who had witnessed his impossible arrival hours earlier. Thunder didn't bark or jump or display any of the exuberant behaviors typical of dogs reuniting with their people. Instead, he moved with the same careful precision he'd shown throughout his career, pressing his massive head against Isabella's chest and releasing a sound that was part whine, part sigh, the sound of a creature who had been holding his breath for 4 years and could finally exhale. Isabella's hands moved over Thunder's familiar form, cataloging the changes that 4 years of living wild had wrought. He was leaner, his ribs more prominent beneath his thick coat. Gray had spread from his muzzle to encompass most of his face, and there was a notch missing from his left ear that spoke of some violent encounter in the woods. But his muscles were still strong beneath her fingers, and when he looked at her, she saw the same soul that had comforted her through thunderstorms and protected her family with unwavering devotion. "I know, boy," she murmured into his fur, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the forest dirt and dried blood. "I know you've been waiting." Nurse Sarah Mitchell watched the reunion from a respectful distance, her experienced eye taking in details that the other staff members missed. This wasn't a random woman being kind to a stray dog. This was family, the deep, bone-level recognition between two beings who had shared grief and loss, and somehow found each other again. The dog's entire body had relaxed the moment the young woman appeared, as if he'd been holding himself together through sheer willpower until she arrived. But even as Thunder allowed himself this moment of connection, his attention kept returning to the trauma room behind him. He would look at Isabella with those remarkable amber eyes, then turn toward the room where doctors worked to save the baby he'd rescued, then back to Isabella, clearly trying to communicate something urgent. "What is it, Thunder?" Isabella asked, following his gaze toward the trauma room, where she could see medical staff moving with the controlled urgency that meant a life hung in the balance. "What did you bring them?" Thunder's response was another of those complex sounds, part whine, part growl, part something that sounded almost like speech. He was trying to tell her something, trying to make her understand that his arrival at the hospital wasn't random, wasn't coincidental. Sheriff Tom Bradley approached them carefully, his weathered face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. "Isabella, I don't know how to explain what happened tonight." "Baby. The baby," she said slowly, the pieces beginning to form a picture she wasn't sure she wanted to see. "How old?" 3 days, maybe less. Hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. Tom's voice was grim. "Isabella, she was wrapped in a blanket from the pediatric wing that burned down 3 years ago." Thunder pressed closer to Isabella, his body warm and solid against her side. But she could feel the tension in his muscles, the coiled readiness of a working dog who knew his mission wasn't complete. Isabella stared through the trauma room's observation window at the tiny form surrounded by medical equipment, and the final pieces of her father's investigation clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The baby Thunder had rescued, impossibly wrapped in fabric that shouldn't exist, brought by a dog who was supposed to be dead, fit the exact profile of the missing children her father had been investigating 4 years ago. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning in her chest, "I need to tell you what my father was really working on before he died." Sheriff Bradley's expression grew grave. "I was hoping you'd never have to know about that." "You knew?" "Not everything, but Michael shared some of his concerns with me toward the end. He was investigating missing children reports, babies who disappeared from families that didn't have the resources or legal knowledge to push for proper investigations." Isabella nodded, her hand still resting on Thunder's head, drawing strength from his solid presence. 7 families between 2018 and 2019. All low income, all reporting newborns who vanished under suspicious circumstances. Dad had documentation that adoption records didn't match birth certificates, that babies listed as placed in loving homes had no paper trail leading to actual families. Every time Michael requested permission to dig deeper. Tom continued, his voice heavy with old frustration. He was reassigned, told the cases were resolved through proper channels, that interfering would jeopardize legitimate adoptions. Thunder shifted beside Isabella, releasing a low whine that seemed to carry the weight of everything he'd witnessed, but couldn't communicate. She realized that throughout her father's investigation, Thunder had been there, his exceptional memory recording scents, locations, faces, creating a living archive of evidence that only he could access. 2 weeks before Dad died, Isabella said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, he called me. He was terrified, Tom. Said he'd found physical evidence of illegal medical experiments, but that someone was watching him. The words hung in the sterile hospital air like a death sentence. Medical experiments. That wasn't standard protocol, was it? Tom shook his head grimly. Retired canine units are usually adopted by their handlers' families or other officers. I questioned the order at the time, but it came from high up in the department. Said Thunder was too traumatized by Michael's death to be safely rehomed. But Isabella understood now. Someone had wanted Thunder dead, not because he was traumatized, but because he was a witness. His nose could identify scents from crime scenes. His memory could connect locations and people across years of investigation. In a conspiracy involving missing children and medical experiments, a dog with Thunder's training and experience was a liability that needed to be eliminated. The baby he brought tonight, Isabella said, looking through the observation window at the tiny form fighting for life. She fits the profile perfectly, doesn't she? Tom nodded. Young mother, probably from a low-income family. Baby listed as deceased or placed for adoption, but with no legitimate paper trail. Thunder pressed his muzzle against Isabella's hand, then looked pointedly toward the trauma room. His message was clear. This was why he'd survived 4 years in the wilderness. This was why he'd waited and watched and remembered, not just to rescue one baby, but to finally expose the conspiracy that had cost his handler, her father, his life. As Isabella stared at the trauma room where doctors worked to save the mysterious baby, Thunder released another of his complex sounds, part whine, part howl, heavy with years of patient waiting and the weight of secrets that only he had carried. Both of them understood that this rescue was just the beginning. Somewhere in Millbrook's recent past lay a conspiracy involving missing children, illegal medical experiments, and murder. Her father had died trying to expose it, and someone had attempted to eliminate the only witness who could lead investigators to the truth. But Thunder had survived, and now, 4 years later, he had finally found a way to speak for the voiceless, to bring justice for the innocent, and to honor the memory of the man who had trained him to never give up on a mission. The baby in the trauma room wasn't just a rescue. She was evidence. And if Isabella's growing suspicions were correct, she might not be the only one who needed saving. Thunder's amber eyes met hers with an intensity that took her breath away. His mission wasn't complete. This was only the beginning of uncovering a 4-year-old conspiracy that had cost Michael Santos his life and threatened to claim countless more innocent victims. The hunt for justice was just beginning. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been working emergency medicine for 12 years, and in that time, she'd developed an eye for reading behavior, not just in her human patients, but in the service animal category she'd mentally cataloged over the years. This wasn't a traumatized rescue dog seeking comfort or shelter. This wasn't even a lost pet trying to find its way home. Thunder moved with the calculated precision of a professional investigator, following protocols that had been drilled into him through years of specialized training. Every step was deliberate, every pause meaningful, every movement part of a larger, systematic approach to gathering information. After allowing himself those precious moments of reunion with Isabella, Thunder had positioned himself at the emergency entrance and begun what could only be described as a methodical search pattern. Starting from the exact spot where he'd delivered the baby hours earlier, the German shepherd began working his way through the hospital corridors with his nose to the ground, moving in a precise grid pattern that spoke of advanced canine training. Hospital employees stopped their rounds to watch the remarkable display. Janitor Carlos Mendez, who had been mopping floors at St. Catherine's for 8 years, found himself leaning on his mop handle in amazement. "I've heard stories about police dogs," he whispered to night nurse Jennifer Walsh, "but I've never seen one actually work." Thunder's search wasn't random wandering. It was a systematic investigation. He would spend exactly 30 seconds examining each section of corridor, his powerful nose taking in layers of scent information that painted a complex picture invisible to human senses. When he found nothing of interest, he would move to the next grid square with military precision. When something caught his attention, he would pause, investigate more thoroughly, then file the information away in his remarkable memory before continuing. The pattern continued through the main corridors, past the nurses' station, around the waiting area, until Thunder reached the hospital's east corridor. Here, his behavior changed dramatically. The controlled, methodical search gave way to obvious agitation. His ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest as he approached a maintenance door that had been painted over so many times that the original color was impossible to determine. Thunder began scratching at the door with increasing urgency, his claws leaving marks in the thick layers of institutional paint. He would scratch, then press his nose to the crack beneath the door, then scratch again, his entire body radiating tension and purpose. "What is it, boy?" Isabella asked, kneeling beside him and placing a calming hand on his back. She could feel the tremor of excitement, or perhaps agitation, running through his muscles. "Thunder's nose can detect scents that are days, even weeks old," Isabella explained to Sheriff Bradley, as they watched the dog's increasingly frantic behavior. "If something happened here, something connected to whatever he's been tracking, he'll find it. His scent memory is virtually photographic." Sheriff Bradley examined the maintenance door more closely. It was sealed with an electronic lock that required administrative access, the kind of security measure that was unusual for a simple storage area. The multiple layers of paint suggested this door had been sealed and resealed numerous times, as if someone was very concerned about keeping whatever lay beyond it completely inaccessible. "This door isn't on any of the public building schematics I've seen," Bradley muttered, pulling out his phone to photograph the lock mechanism. Thunder's insistence became more pronounced. He would lie down in front of the door, pressing his body against it as if trying to absorb every molecule of scent that escaped through the sealed frame, then jump up and begin scratching again. His behavior clearly communicated that whatever lay beyond this door was critically important to his mission. The sound of approaching high heels on linoleum announced the arrival of Dr. Margaret Kane, St. Catherine's Hospital administrator. At 55, Dr. Kane projected an aura of crisp professional authority, but Isabella noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly as she took in the scene. A police sheriff, a young woman, and a German shepherd focused intently on a door that was supposed to be forgotten. "Is there a problem here?" Dr. Kane's voice carried a defensive edge that immediately put Isabella on alert. "We need access to this area," Sheriff Bradley said with quiet authority. "That's impossible." Dr. Kane's response was too quick, too emphatic. "That door leads to decommissioned storage areas, old equipment, condemned building sections. It's been sealed for safety reasons." But Thunder wasn't buying the explanation any more than Isabella was. Despite Dr. Kane's attempts to redirect the group away from the door, offering tours of other hospital areas, suggesting that the dog was simply confused by old scents, Thunder remained fixated on his target. He would allow them to move him a few feet away, but invariably return to the same spot, lying down in front of the door like a sentinel standing guard over something precious. "Ma'am," Sheriff Bradley said, his tone taking on the firmness of official police business, "I'm going to need you to open this door." Dr. Kane's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Sheriff Bradley, I assure you there's nothing of interest beyond that door, just old hospital equipment and storage areas that haven't been used in years." But Thunder's behavior told a different story entirely. This was a dog who had been trained to detect evidence, to follow scent trails that could lead to missing persons or hidden crimes. His insistence on this particular door meant only one thing. Whatever lay beyond it was connected to the conspiracy that had cost Michael Santos his life and brought Thunder out of 4 years of hiding to rescue a baby who shouldn't exist. Sheriff Bradley's patience with Dr. Kane's objections had, reached its limit. With the authority vested in him by Millbrook County, he demanded immediate access to the sealed areas, overriding her increasingly frantic protests about safety concerns and liability issues. The electronic lock yielded to his override code, and the heavy maintenance door swung open with a groan that spoke of years of disuse. What lay beyond defied every expectation. Behind the maintenance door, a staircase descended into the hospital's lower level, areas that didn't appear on any current building schematics Isabella had ever seen. The steps were concrete, institutional, but older than the main hospital's construction. As they descended, their flashlights revealed walls of rough concrete block, rather than the smooth drywall and polished surfaces of the hospital above. The air below was immediately different, stale and cold, with an underlying smell that made Isabella's stomach clench. Disinfectant mingled with something organic and unsettling, a combination that spoke of medical procedures conducted in less than sterile conditions. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step, and their breath began to fog in the chill. Thunder moved through the underground passages with a familiarity that was both remarkable and terrifying. This wasn't a dog exploring unknown territory. This was a creature retracing steps he'd taken before, following a mental map that had been burned into his memory through previous visits. He led them through the maze of corridors with absolute confidence, never hesitating at intersections, never showing doubt about which direction to take. The architectural anomalies became more apparent as they went deeper. These rooms and corridors had clearly been designed for medical purposes, but they lacked the modern safety features, the redundant ventilation systems, the emergency protocols that governed every inch of the hospital above. This was medical space designed to be hidden, to operate outside the oversight and regulations that protected patients in legitimate facilities. Evidence of recent habitation was scattered throughout the passages. Food containers with expiration dates from the past week, blankets that still held the warmth of human occupation, medical equipment that hummed with active power despite the area supposedly being decommissioned for years. Someone had been living down here, working down here, maintaining operations in these hidden depths, long after the official records claimed the space had been abandoned. Thunder led them to a room that made Isabella's blood run cold. Pediatric medical equipment filled the space. Incubators, monitoring devices, IV stands scaled for infant patients. All of it operational, all of it recently used. The machines displayed readings on their digital screens, and the soft beep of monitoring equipment created an eerie soundtrack in the underground darkness. The sophisticated nature of the setup. Someone's been using this facility to monitor infant patients recently. Isabella watched Thunder move through the room with the systematic precision of a trained investigator and suddenly understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't random exploration. Thunder was retracing a specific path, likely one he had taken with her father years ago during the investigation that had cost Michael Santos his life. "He's been here before," she said quietly, watching Thunder pause at specific locations, sniffing certain pieces of equipment with particular intensity. "Dad brought him here during his investigation. Thunder remembers everything." The implications were staggering. Michael Santos hadn't just been investigating missing children reports from his desk at the police station. He had discovered this hidden facility, had brought Thunder here to document evidence with his remarkable scent memory, had been building a case that would have exposed whatever was happening in these underground rooms. And someone had killed him to prevent that exposure. Thunder paused at a filing cabinet in the corner of the room, pressing his nose against the metal surface and releasing a soft whine. The cabinet was locked, but Sheriff Bradley's flashlight revealed scratch marks around the lock mechanism. Recent attempts to access whatever was stored inside. The filing cabinet yielded to Sheriff Bradley's lock-picking skills, revealing contents that transformed their investigation from missing persons case to something far more sinister. Medical records dating back to 2018 filled the drawers, meticulously organized and documented with the precision of a legitimate research facility. But the subject matter revealed activities that belonged in the darkest chapters of medical history. Project Silent Angel. Isabella read from the cover of the first file, her voice barely above a whisper in the underground chamber. The documents revealed a systematic program designed to study infant development under controlled isolation conditions, with particular focus on measuring and enhancing what the researchers termed emotional response suppression. The methodology was chillingly clinical. Newborn subjects were placed in environments designed to minimize human contact, sensory stimulation, and emotional bonding, with researchers carefully documenting the resulting psychological and physiological changes. 7 detailed files contained the complete records of individual subjects, each including photographs, medical data, behavioral observations, and progress reports. The photos showed children who should have been developing normally in loving families, instead confined to sterile environments that resembled laboratory conditions more than nurseries. The behavioral observations documented the gradual suppression of normal infant responses. Crying decreased, eye contact diminished, attachment behaviors were systematically eliminated. Dr. Victoria Blackwell's handwritten notes filled the margins of many documents, describing her efforts to create what she termed emotionally stable children through carefully controlled sensory deprivation and minimal human contact. Her clinical detachment was evident in every line. Subject 3 shows reduced stress response to isolation after 47 days of protocol implementation. Attachment behaviors successfully suppressed. Isabella felt sick as she read the timeline correlations. The dates in the files matched exactly with the missing children cases that her father had been investigating. Every family that had reported a missing newborn, every suspicious adoption that had left no paper trail, every case that had been mysteriously closed without resolution. They were all here documented as research subjects in Project Silent Angel. Thunder's role in the original investigation became clear, as they found multiple references to canine interference in the later documents. Dr. Blackwell's notes grew increasingly concerned about the persistent canine surveillance threat, and included recommendations to eliminate the witness animal to protect the project's security. They were going to kill him to protect their secret, Isabella whispered, her hand finding Thunder's head and holding on as if he might disappear again. Among the files they found a record labeled Subject Angel 7, with a photograph that made Isabella's heart stop. The baby in the picture was unmistakably the same infant Thunder had brought to the emergency room hours earlier. The documentation showed she had been part of the program for the first days of her life, before somehow escaping or being removed from the facility. The most chilling discovery was the timestamp on the most recent entries. The final documentation was dated just 3 days ago, indicating that Project Silent Angel had continued operating long after Michael Santos's death, long after Thunder's supposed euthanization, long after everyone involved should have assumed their secret was safe. Someone had been maintaining these experiments, continuing this systematic abuse of innocent children, hiding in the depths, beneath St. Catherine's Hospital, while the world above went about its business, never suspecting the horrors being conducted in their midst. As Isabella and Sheriff Bradley worked to photograph the evidence, documenting every page of the conspiracy that had cost her father his life, the lights suddenly cut out. The underground facility plunged into absolute darkness, their flashlights providing only small circles of illumination in the oppressive blackness. But it was the sound that made their blood freeze, footsteps echoing from deeper within the complex, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who knew these passages intimately. Someone else was down there in the darkness with them, and their presence had been discovered. Thunder's low growl rumbled through the darkness, and Isabella realized growing terror that their investigation had just become a trap. Whoever was responsible for Project Silent Angel was still here, still active, and they had no intention of allowing their secrets to see daylight. The hunt for truth had just become a fight for survival. Sheriff Bradley's hand moved instinctively to his radio in the oppressive darkness of the underground facility, his voice tight with controlled urgency as he called for backup. "This is Sheriff Bradley, requesting immediate assistance at St. Catherine's Hospital. We have an active situation in the basement levels. Send paramedics and additional units. Now." The static that answered him was deafening in the confined space, and Isabella felt her heart sink as she realized the thick concrete walls were blocking their communications with the outside world. They were trapped in this underground maze with whoever was moving through the shadows, cut off from help and running on failing flashlight batteries. Isabella held Thunder close, her arms wrapped around his powerful neck, and felt his muscles coil with tension beneath her hands. Every fiber of the German shepherd's being was alert to danger that her human senses couldn't detect. His ears were pricked forward, his nose working constantly to analyze the complex layers of scent that told him stories she could never access. Whatever was approaching through these tunnels, Thunder knew its nature, its intent, its proximity, with the precision of a living radar system. But the footsteps they heard weren't approaching, they were retreating, echoing through the concrete corridors, with the quick, purposeful pace of someone who knew these passages intimately and was trying to escape before being discovered. The sound bounced off the walls in a confusing pattern that made it impossible to determine direction or distance, but the urgency was unmistakable. Thunder broke free from Isabella's grip with sudden explosive energy, charging down a narrow corridor that branched off from the main laboratory space. His nails clicked against the concrete floor in a rapid staccato rhythm as he followed scent trails invisible to human perception, his powerful frame disappearing into the darkness beyond their flashlight beams. "Thunder, wait," Isabella called, but the German shepherd was already deep into pursuit mode, following protocols drilled into him during years of police work with her father. Isabella and Sheriff Bradley had no choice but to follow, their flashlights revealing glimpses of a facility far more extensive than either had imagined. The underground complex stretched beneath multiple buildings of the hospital campus, connected by a maze of corridors, service tunnels, and maintenance passages that created a hidden city beneath the legitimate medical facility above. The architectural revelation was staggering. This wasn't a simple basement storage area or forgotten construction mistake. This was a purpose-built facility, designed to operate in complete secrecy, with its own ventilation systems, power grid, and communication networks. Someone had invested significant time, money, and planning into creating a parallel medical facility that could function independently of the hospital above. Signs of recent activity were everywhere. Warm coffee cups sat on desks, their contents still steaming in the cold underground air. Fresh food containers bore timestamps from earlier that evening, and computer monitors glowed with active programs, their screens displaying data that continued to scroll and update in real time. Whoever had been working down here had fled in such haste that they'd left everything running, creating a snapshot of operations that had been suddenly abandoned. Thunder's barking echoed from deeper in the facility, and they followed the sound through increasingly narrow passages until they found him at a heavy steel door that represented the most secure barrier they'd encountered yet. The German shepherd was scratching at the metal surface with desperate urgency, his claws leaving white marks on the gray paint as he tried to reach whatever lay beyond. The security measures surrounding this particular door were extensive and sophisticated. Multiple electronic locks, deadbolts, and what appeared to be a biometric scanner suggested that whatever was contained behind this barrier was the most sensitive, most secret part of the entire operation. The door itself was equipped with soundproofing material around its edges, thick rubber gaskets that would prevent any sound from escaping the chamber beyond. "This is maximum security," Sheriff Bradley muttered, examining the lock mechanisms with his flashlight. "Whatever they're hiding behind here, they really don't want anyone to find it." Thunder's behavior had shifted from pursuit mode to rescue mode. His whining carried a different quality now, not the aggressive hunting cry of a dog chasing prey, but the desperate communication of an animal who knew that lives were in immediate danger. He pressed his body against the door, as if trying to push through solid steel through sheer force of will, then looked back at Isabella with eyes that pleaded for her to understand the urgency of what he was trying to tell her. "There's someone in there," Isabella realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who needs help." The implications were terrifying. If Project Silent Angel was still active, if children were still being held in this underground facility, then the retreating footsteps they'd heard might have belonged to someone fleeing after setting in motion protocols that would eliminate evidence, including any living evidence that could expose the conspiracy. Time was running out, and Thunder knew it. His agitation increased with every passing second, his entire body communicating the desperate need to reach whatever lay beyond that steel barrier. Whatever was happening behind that soundproof door, it was that emerged from 4 years of hiding. The mission that had driven him to risk everything to bring the baby to safety and lead them to this moment. The hunt for truth had led them to the heart of the conspiracy. But Isabella feared they might be too late to save whoever was trapped behind that imposing steel door. Sheriff Bradley's bolt cutters made quick work of the external security chains, the metal links snapping with sharp cracks that echoed through the underground chamber like gunshots. Thunder paced anxiously behind them, his powerful body coiled with tension as he waited for access to whatever lay beyond the steel barrier. When the final chain fell away, the heavy door swung open to reveal a scene that would haunt Isabella for the rest of her life. Behind the soundproofed barrier lay an active medical laboratory that belonged in a cutting-edge research facility, not hidden in the basement of a small-town hospital. Modern equipment hummed with quiet efficiency. Computer monitors displayed real-time vital signs in neat columns of data, and the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, the warm, organic scent of human habitation. But it was the sound that stopped Isabella's heart, the soft, rhythmic breathing of multiple sleepers, emanating from individual rooms that branched off from the main laboratory space like cells in a hive. 6 children, ranging in age from 18 months to 4 years, lay in medically induced sleep states in separate chambers connected to the central monitoring station. Each child was connected to IV lines that fed clear fluids into their small bodies, while sophisticated monitoring equipment tracked their vital signs with the precision of an intensive care unit. Wall-mounted charts displayed what the researchers had clinically labeled emotional response suppression levels, with detailed graphs showing the systematic reduction of normal childhood behaviors over time. Thunder moved between the rooms with heartbreaking recognition, sniffing each child carefully, his behavior confirming Isabella's worst fears. He remembered these children. He had been here before, had witnessed their capture, their imprisonment, their systematic psychological destruction. His whine carried layers of grief and guilt, the sound of a protector who had been forced to watch innocents suffer without being able to intervene. "They're alive," Isabella whispered, her hands shaking as she checked pulse points and breathing patterns. The children were stable, but unnaturally still, their faces lacking the animated expressions that should have characterized healthy young minds. 6 children, ages 18 months to 4 years, all in medically induced states. This is now a mass casualty rescue operation. Security camera footage displayed on the laboratory's monitoring screens revealed the final piece of the immediate puzzle. Just minutes before their arrival, someone in medical scrubs had fled through the facility's corridors, moving with the purposeful haste of a person implementing emergency evacuation protocols. The timestamp showed that Dr. Victoria Blackwell had been in this room less than 10 minutes ago, monitoring her subjects and likely preparing to eliminate evidence of her crimes. Thunder led them to a concealed exit, hidden behind a false wall panel, revealing utility tunnels that connected the underground laboratory directly to the hospital's main building. The escape route was sophisticated and well-planned, allowing personnel to move between the hidden facility and the legitimate hospital above without detection. Fresh footprints in the dust showed that this passage had been used very recently, confirming that whoever had been operating this nightmare was still somewhere in the building above. The children began to stir, as the medical equipment was adjusted to gradually reduce their sedation levels, and Isabella felt her heart break as she watched their slow awakening. These should have been bright, curious, energetic children, exploring the world with the boundless enthusiasm of youth. Instead, they opened their eyes with the flat, affectless stare of subjects who had been systematically taught that emotion was dangerous, that connection was forbidden, that survival meant complete emotional shutdown. Thunder positioned himself where all 6 children could see him as they awakened, his presence seeming to provide some comfort to young minds that had been denied normal human interaction for months or years. Several of the children reached toward him with small hands, and Isabella realized that the German shepherd might have been the only source of unconditional love these children had experienced during their captivity. As paramedics arrived and began the complex process of safely transporting the children to proper medical care, Isabella felt the weight of everything they'd discovered. Project Silent Angel wasn't just a historical crime, it was an active, ongoing conspiracy that had been systematically destroying young lives for years while the world above remained oblivious to their suffering. The computer files they discovered in the underground laboratory revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond Dr. Victoria Blackwell's individual crimes. Financial records showed funding from private research grants disguised as legitimate pediatric care initiatives, with money flowing from foundations with innocuous names like the Child Development Research Institute and the Pediatric Wellness Foundation. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars had been channeled into Project Silent Angel over the past 4 years. Hospital staff involvement was documented in meticulous detail. Nurses, administrators, security personnel, and even janitors had been recruited into the conspiracy through a combination of financial incentives and carefully crafted cover stories about special needs children requiring alternative care approaches. The records showed that at least a dozen hospital employees knew about the underground facility and had actively participated in maintaining its secrecy. The adoption network that supplied children to the project was particularly sinister. Corrupt adoption agencies, social workers, and legal officials had created a pipeline of vulnerable infants from families in crisis. Single mothers, undocumented immigrants, families facing economic hardship, who could be convinced to place their children in loving homes. Without realizing, their babies were being delivered to an underground research facility. Michael Santos's investigation had penetrated deeper into this network than Isabella had ever realized. Detailed notes showed that her father had identified the key players, traced the financial connections, and was planning to expose the entire conspiracy when he was murdered. His handwritten observations revealed a man who understood the scope of what he was facing. This isn't just child abuse. This is systematic human experimentation on American soil. The evidence of Michael Santos's murder was overwhelming. Digital communications between Dr. Blackwell and unnamed co-conspirators discussed the Santos problem and the need for permanent resolution of the security threat. The timeline showed that within hours of Michael's discovery of the underground facility, plans were set in motion to eliminate him and his canine partner. Thunder's role in the original investigation was documented extensively. Records indicated that the German Shepherd had been specifically trained not just for standard police work, but to identify and track the unique scent signatures associated with the laboratory's operations. His exceptional memory and tracking abilities made him the perfect witness to crimes that left no conventional evidence, but also made him a liability that needed to be eliminated. Despite Michael Santos's death and Thunder's supposed euthanization, Project Silent Angel had continued operations with increased security measures. Dr. Blackwell had expanded the program, refined the techniques, and even begun exporting her methods to similar facilities in other states. The rescued children represented just the most recent subjects in an ongoing program that had affected dozens of families over 4 years. Thunder's rescue of Subject Angel 7 had disrupted everything. The baby's escape from the facility had triggered security. Greatest fear had been realized. Their secret was no longer safe. As paramedics worked to stabilize the rescued children for transport to legitimate medical facilities, Isabella discovered a final computer file that made her blood run cold. Termination Protocol contained detailed instructions for eliminating all evidence of Project Silent Angel if the operation was ever discovered. The protocol included plans for destroying the facility, eliminating computer records, and, most horrifically, ensuring that no living subjects remained to testify about their experiences. The timestamp on the file showed that Termination Protocol had been activated just 20 minutes ago. Somewhere in the darkness above them, Dr. Victoria Blackwell was implementing a plan that would erase every trace of Project Silent Angel's existence. The children they'd rescued were safe, but Isabella realized with growing horror that other facilities, other children, other secrets might already be disappearing into the night. Thunder's mission was far from over. If anything, their discovery of the underground laboratory was just the beginning of exposing a conspiracy that reached far beyond the basement of St. Catherine's Hospital. The hunt for justice had become a race against time, to save victims who didn't even know they needed saving. The German Shepherd looked at Isabella with eyes that held 4 years of patient waiting and the weight of secrets that only he had carried. His message was clear. The real fight was just beginning. The pediatric ICU at St. Catherine's Hospital had never seen anything like the 6 children Thunder had led them to rescue from the underground laboratory. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between the small beds with the grim efficiency of a medical professional facing the unthinkable, her trained eye cataloging damage that went far beyond physical neglect. These children bore the systematic scars of prolonged psychological warfare, waged against developing minds by people who should have been protecting them. The malnutrition was severe but manageable. Growth charts showed developmental delays consistent with months or years of inadequate nutrition, but their bodies could recover with proper care. What worried Dr. Rodriguez more were the neurological signs suggesting experimental drug exposure. Blood tests revealed traces of compounds she couldn't immediately identify, substances that appeared designed to suppress normal childhood responses and emotional development. 2-year-old Marcus, the oldest of the rescued children, lay motionless in his bed, staring at the ceiling with an expression of profound emptiness that no child should ever wear. When Dr. Rodriguez gently touched his hand, he didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't show any of the normal reactions that even sick children displayed when examined by strangers. His chart from the underground facility indicated he had been part of the program for over 18 months, nearly his entire. 18-month-old Sophia showed similar symptoms, but with an added complication that made Dr. Rodriguez's heart ache. The little girl had clearly learned that crying brought punishment rather than comfort. Even when medical procedures caused obvious discomfort, she remained silent, her dark eyes tracking the medical staff with the wary alertness of prey animals constantly assessing threats. Thunder had positioned himself in the central area of the pediatric ICU, where he could monitor all 6 children simultaneously. And his behavior provided insights that no medical textbook could offer. The German shepherd moved between the rooms with the systematic precision of a nurse making rounds, spending more time near children whose conditions were most critical, becoming agitated when vital signs fluctuated, calming when the children's breathing stabilized. Dr. Rodriguez found herself relying on Thunder's assessment more than she'd ever admit in official medical records. When the dog showed increased anxiety around 4-year-old Emma, additional tests revealed a dangerous infection that the standard blood work had missed. When Thunder refused to leave 3-year-old David's bedside, closer examination showed signs of internal injuries that hadn't been apparent during initial triage. "He knows them," Isabella observed, watching Thunder gently place his massive head near each child's bed in turn. "He's been watching over them for months, maybe years. He knows their individual conditions better than any medical chart." The emotional responses, or lack thereof, were the most heartbreaking aspect of the children's condition. Normal children would have been crying for their parents, showing fear or curiosity about the hospital environment, seeking comfort from the medical staff. These children did none of those things. They lay quietly, accepting medical procedures with the resigned compliance of subjects who had learned that resistance was futile and emotions were dangerous. Isabella stayed close to Thunder, helping the medical staff interpret his subtle behavioral cues. When the German shepherd showed particular concern about a specific child, she would alert Dr. Rodriguez, who had learned to trust the dog's instincts. Thunder's presence also seemed to provide some comfort to the children, not the exuberant joy that normal children might show when meeting a friendly dog, but a subtle relaxation that suggested his familiar scent and presence represented safety in their carefully controlled emotional landscape. The medical challenges were compounded by the complete fabrication of the children's medical histories. The underground facility's records were clinically detailed about the experiments, but provided no information about the children's lives before their capture, their genetic predispositions, their normal developmental baselines. Dr. Rodriguez was treating young patients whose real names she didn't know, whose families had been told they were dead, whose entire existence had been systematically erased from official records. Time pressure added urgency to every medical decision. Dr. Blackwell and her team were still at large, and intelligence reports suggested they might attempt to retrieve their subjects or eliminate evidence of their crimes. The hospital had been placed under federal protection, but everyone understood that the children remained vulnerable until their captors were apprehended. Thunder seemed to understand this urgency as well. His vigilance never relaxed, his ears constantly monitoring sounds from the corridors, his nose analyzing every scent that entered the pediatric ward. When unfamiliar footsteps approached, his low growl would alert security. When medical staff he didn't recognize attempted to enter the children's rooms, his positioning would subtly block access until Isabella could verify their legitimacy. "They're not safe yet," Isabella whispered to Thunder as they watched over the sleeping children. "None of us are safe until we find her." The FBI's arrival at St. Catherine's Hospital transformed the investigation from a local police matter into a federal manhunt. Agent Sarah Chen, a seasoned investigator specializing in crimes against children, immediately recognized the scope of what they were dealing with. Project Silent Angel represented the kind of systematic human trafficking and abuse that fell squarely under federal jurisdiction, and the evidence suggested connections that extended far beyond Millbrook's borders. "This German shepherd," Agent Chen said, studying Thunder with professional interest. "His tracking abilities could be crucial for locating Dr. Blackwell and any other victims." Isabella nodded, her hand resting on Thunder's head as she felt his muscles coil with anticipation. The dog understood that their work wasn't finished, that somewhere in the darkness beyond the hospital, the woman responsible for years of systematic child abuse was still free to continue her crimes. Thunder led the federal agents out of the hospital into the pre-dawn darkness of Millbrook's empty streets, his nose to the ground as he followed scent trails invisible to human perception. The German shepherd's tracking was systematic and purposeful, leading them through residential neighborhoods, past closed businesses, toward the outskirts of town where streetlights gave way to rural darkness. The scent trail was complex. Multiple people, medical equipment, the lingering chemical signatures of pharmaceuticals and disinfectants. Thunder paused frequently to sort through the layers of information his extraordinary nose provided, then continued with renewed purpose toward a destination that seemed clear in his mind. The farmhouse, they discovered that the building was occupied. Medical supplies, computer equipment, and sophisticated communication devices suggested this was Dr. Blackwell's carefully prepared safe house. Evidence of extensive planning filled the farmhouse. Detailed contingency plans for evacuating Project Silent Angel included arrangements for relocating equipment, destroying records, and, most chillingly, disposed of what the documents euphemistically termed organic evidence. Maps marked similar facilities in other states, suggesting that Dr. Blackwell had been preparing to expand her operations even as she planned to abandon the Millbrook site. They arrived just as Dr. Blackwell was loading equipment into a white van parked behind the farmhouse. In the early morning darkness, Isabella could see the woman who had systematically tortured children for years, moving with the clinical efficiency that had characterized all her crimes. Medical equipment, computer drives, and sealed containers that might have contained evidence or victims were being carefully arranged in the vehicle. Thunder's confrontation was immediate and decisive. The German shepherd positioned himself between Dr. Blackwell and her escape vehicle, his aggressive stance and low growl making it clear that she wouldn't be leaving without going through him first. His protective positioning allowed federal agents to surround the area and secure the scene before Dr. Blackwell could complete her escape. Additional evidence in the farmhouse revealed the full scope of Dr. Blackwell's crimes. Photographs of children who had been part of earlier phases of the project. Medical records documenting experiments that had been conducted over years, and communication records with co-conspirators in other states painted a picture of systematic abuse that extended far beyond the 6 children they had rescued. Isabella watched as federal agents placed Dr. Blackwell in handcuffs and felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and horror. They had stopped this particular monster, but the evidence suggested that Project Silent Angel was just one tentacle of a much larger conspiracy that had been operating across the country for years. Under interrogation in federal custody, Dr. Victoria Blackwell revealed herself to be a true believer in the twisted ideology that had driven Project Silent Angel. She showed no remorse for the systematic abuse of innocent children, instead describing her work as valuable research that would benefit society by creating what she termed emotionally controlled individuals who could function in high-stress environments without the psychological vulnerabilities that affected normal people. "You have no idea what we were accomplishing," Dr. Blackwell told Agent Chen, with the cold clinical detachment that had characterized all her crimes. Funding source for Project Silent Angel was revealed to be a private foundation with connections to military contractors and intelligence agencies. The foundation's stated mission was researching treatments for PTSD and trauma-related disorders, but their real interest lay in developing techniques for creating individuals who could function effectively in extreme situations without being compromised by normal human emotional responses. Dr. Blackwell's confession confirmed what Isabella had suspected about her father's death. Officer Michael Santos had discovered Project Silent Angel through his investigation of missing children, had penetrated their security measures, and was planning to expose the entire conspiracy when he was murdered. The killing had been carefully staged to look like an accident, but it was actually a calculated elimination of the greatest threat to their operation.
The dog was supposed to be eliminated too,
Dr. Blackwell admitted with clinical detachment.
His bond with the subjects and his tracking abilities made him a significant security risk. The euthanization order was part of the cover-up.
Isabella felt a surge of pride and grief as she realized that her decision to save Thunder 4 years ago had been crucial to eventually exposing the crimes. Without Thunder's survival, without his patient gathering of evidence, and his final rescue of Subject Angel 7, Project Silent Angel might have continued operating indefinitely, destroying countless more young lives in pursuit of their twisted research goals. Federal investigation revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Similar projects were discovered in 7 other states, with hundreds of children affected over the past decade. The network included hospital administrators, adoption agency staff, social workers, and Research Foundation executives, all working together to maintain a pipeline of vulnerable children for systematic experimentation. Analysis of Thunder's behavior during the investigation showed remarkable intelligence and planning. The German Shepherd had been systematically gathering evidence for years, mapping the facility, monitoring the children's conditions, and waiting for the right moment to act. His rescue of Angel 7 hadn't been opportunistic. It had been a carefully planned operation designed to force exposure of the entire conspiracy. Legal proceedings moved swiftly as federal prosecutors prepared cases against dozens of conspirators, hospital administrators who had facilitated the underground laboratory, adoption agency staff who had provided children, Research Foundation executives who had funded the projects, all faced charges that would result in life sentences if convicted. Loving homes to rescued children. They're walking among you, and you'll never find them all. The implication was terrifying. Project Silent Angel hadn't just been conducting experiments in underground laboratories. They had been placing their successful subjects in adoptive families throughout the country, creating sleeper agents of sorts, who had been systematically stripped of normal human emotional responses. Isabella looked at Thunder, whose amber eyes reflected the weight of secrets that might never be fully uncovered. They had won this battle, had rescued 6 children and exposed a major conspiracy. But Dr. Blackwell's final words suggested that the war against those who would exploit the innocent was far from over. Somewhere in America, children who had been subjected to systematic psychological manipulation were growing up in families who had no idea what had been done to them. The hunt for justice would continue, but it would require the same patient dedication that Thunder had shown, the willingness to wait, to watch, to remember, and to act when the moment was right. The German Shepherd, who had been declared dead 4 years ago, had proven that loyalty, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent could triumph over even the most sophisticated evil. But his mission, and Isabella's, was far from complete. 3 weeks after their rescue from the underground laboratory, the children's individual stories began to emerge through careful observation and specialized care. Each child's journey back to humanity was unique, marked by small victories that would have seemed insignificant to the outside world, but represented monumental breakthroughs to the medical staff who witnessed them daily. Angel, the baby Thunder had first rescued, showed remarkable resilience that amazed Dr. Rodriguez and the pediatric team. At barely a month old, she had already begun responding to touch and sound with the natural curiosity of a healthy infant. Her grip strength had returned to normal ranges, and she tracked movement with bright, alert eyes that seemed to hold an intelligence beyond her age. The warmth of human contact no longer caused her to withdraw, and she had begun to make the soft cooing sounds that marked normal infant development. "She's like a flower, opening to sunlight," Isabella observed, watching Angel respond to gentle singing from one of the nurses. Whatever they did to her, she was young enough that it didn't take permanent hold. Luna, the 3-year-old girl who had shown the most severe emotional suppression during rescue, began to display cautious curiosity about her surroundings as the days passed. Her transformation was gradual but unmistakable. Eyes that had once stared blankly at walls now followed the movements of nurses and doctors. When Thunder was present in her room, Luna's progress accelerated noticeably. The German Shepherd's calm couldn't reach. The 4 boys presented more complex challenges. Marcus, at 4 years old, had been in the program longest and showed the most severe developmental delays. His speech was limited to single words, and he often stared into space for hours at a time, as if his mind had retreated to some internal sanctuary where the outside world couldn't reach him. 2-year-old David displayed repetitive behaviors that suggested obsessive-compulsive responses to trauma, while 18-month-old twins Alex and Sam showed different reactions to their shared experience. Alex withdrew into himself, while Sam displayed hypervigilance that made normal sleep impossible. Child psychologists Dr. Jennifer Walsh and Dr. Michael Kim implemented specialized treatment protocols designed specifically to reverse the effects of prolonged isolation and emotional suppression. Their approach was delicate and patient, understanding that forcing emotional responses could cause additional trauma. Instead, they created environments where natural feelings could emerge safely, protected spaces where crying, laughing, or showing fear wouldn't result in punishment. Thunder's role in the children's recovery proved invaluable in ways that no textbook could have predicted. The German Shepherd seemed to understand instinctively that these children required different approaches than normal pediatric patients. With them he moved slowly, kept his voice soft, and allowed them to approach him at their own pace, rather than seeking interaction as he might with typical children. Each child showed positive responses to Thunder's presence, but in uniquely individual ways. Angel would calm instantly when Thunder lay near her crib, her tiny fist sometimes gripping tufts of his fur as she slept. Luna would sit motionless for hours, but when Thunder was nearby, she would occasionally reach out to touch his head, her first voluntary physical contact with any living being. The boys used Thunder as a bridge to the world. If the dog accepted a new person or situation, they were more likely to cautiously explore it themselves. Medical examinations revealed mysteries that went beyond emotional suppression. Some children showed unusual physical developments that suggested they had been subjects of medical experiments involving growth hormones, neurological stimulants, or cognitive enhancement drugs. Blood tests revealed traces of compounds that enhanced memory retention, but suppressed emotional processing, creating children with remarkable intellectual capabilities, but severely limited emotional ranges. Social workers began the heartbreaking process of locating the children's biological families, many of whom had been told their babies died during childbirth or shortly after. The investigative work was complicated by falsified records, destroyed documentation, and families who had been scattered by grief, poverty, or immigration status. For some families, the discovery that their children were alive brought overwhelming joy mixed with years of unprocessed grief. For others, the revelation that their babies had been systematically tortured created additional trauma that required its own therapeutic intervention. Isabella found herself deeply involved in the children's daily care, her connection to Thunder making her a natural bridge between the dog and the young victims. The children seemed to understand that she was connected to their protector, and they showed her a trust that they extended to few other adults. Isabella learned to read Thunder's subtle signals about each child's emotional state, translating his behavioral cues for the medical staff and helping optimize each child's care based on his remarkable insights. Her involvement deepened when she realized that Thunder's presence was essential to the children's continued healing. But his advanced age and the stress of his years in hiding were beginning to show. The German Shepherd was slowing down, his joints stiff from sleeping on forest floors, his hearing diminished from age and exposure. Isabella understood that the children's need for Thunder's presence was both healing and urgent. Time was not on their side. The breakthrough that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning during Luna's routine medical examination. Dr. Rodriguez was checking the 3-year-old's reflexes when the little girl's face suddenly crumpled, and she began to cry. Not the silent, suppressed weeping that had occasionally escaped during her early days of recovery, but the full-throated, desperate sobbing of a child expressing genuine emotion for the first time in years. The sound electrified the entire pediatric ward. Nurses stopped their rounds, doctors paused in their examinations, and even veteran medical staff found themselves wiping away tears as they witnessed Luna's emotional awakening. But it was Thunder's response that transformed the moment from medical breakthrough to profound healing. The German Shepherd, who had been resting in the corner of Luna's room, immediately moved to her bedside and gently placed his massive head near her small form. He didn't try to stop her crying or distract her from her tears. Instead, he simply provided his solid, warm presence as an anchor while she experienced emotions that had been locked away for most of her young life. Luna's tiny hands found Thunder's fur and held on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become overwhelmingly real. Her tears soaked into his coat, and Thunder remained perfectly still, allowing her to use him as both comfort and foundation, while she processed feelings that were entirely new to her conscious experience. The breakthrough had cascading effects on the other children. Within days, behavioral changes rippled through the pediatric ward as each child began to show increasing attachment to Thunder and, through him, distressed. They would reach for Thunder, often before seeking comfort from human caregivers. His presence seemed to give them permission to feel, to express, to be vulnerable in ways that their systematic conditioning had forbidden. Speech development accelerated dramatically once the children began to feel emotionally safe. Marcus, who had been limited to single words, began attempting short phrases, with Thunderdog among his first multi-word expressions. The twins, Alex and Sam, started babbling to each other in their own language, while pointing at Thunder, as if discussing their shared protector. Most remarkably, David began asking questions, simple, direct inquiries, about Thunder's activities, his needs, his comfort, showing the first signs of empathy and concern for another being's welfare. Play behavior emerged gradually but consistently. Under careful supervision, the children began engaging in basic activities that normal children took for granted, stacking blocks, looking at picture books, reaching for toys. But always, Thunder remained nearby as their source of security. If he left the room, play would stop until he returned. If he settled in a different location, the children would gradually migrate to be closer to him. The development of sibling bonds among the rescued children was particularly moving to observe. They began to recognize and comfort each other, forming connections based on their shared experience and mutual understanding. Luna would pat Marcus's hand when he seemed distressed. The twins would sit on either side of David when he displayed repetitive behaviors. These gentle interactions suggested that despite the systematic attempts to suppress their capacity for connection, some fundamental human need for community had survived. Physical health improvements accompanied emotional healing in ways that surprised the medical staff. As the children began to express emotions, their appetites improved, sleep patterns normalized, and growth rates accelerated. It was as if their bodies had been waiting for psychological permission to begin normal development processes that had been suspended during their captivity. Thunder's own adaptation to his new role was remarkable to witness. The elderly German Shepherd seemed to understand that these children required different care than his police work had ever demanded. His movements became slower and more deliberate around them, his voice softer, his patience seemingly infinite. The dog who had been trained to pursue suspects and detect evidence had transformed himself into a therapy animal, with an intuitive understanding of trauma and healing. The DNA testing results brought both joy and heartbreak in equal measure. 5 of the 7 children were successfully matched to biological families who had been living with the devastating belief that their babies were dead. The reunions were complex, emotional events that required careful psychological preparation for both children and parents who had been torn apart by systematic deception. Maria Santos, no relation to Isabella, had been told that her newborn son died from complications during delivery at a clinic in Arizona. When federal agents contacted her 3 years later to inform her that Marcus was alive and recovering in a hospital in Colorado, she collapsed from shock. The reunion required weeks of preparation, counseling for both mother and child, and careful medical supervision as they learned to recognize each other. "He doesn't remember me," Maria sobbed, watching 4-year-old Marcus stare at her with the same blank expression he showed all strangers. "My baby doesn't know who I am." But Thunder understood. The German shepherd positioned himself between Maria and Marcus, allowing the child to use him as a bridge to approach his biological mother. Over days and weeks, with Thunder's patient presence facilitating each interaction, the bond between mother and child began to slowly rebuild. Similar scenes played out as other families were reunited with children they had mourned. Each reunion was unique, shaped by the individual personalities involved and the specific trauma each child had experienced. Some children showed immediate recognition of biological family members, while others required months of careful reintroduction to people who shared their DNA but were strangers to their conscious memory. 2 children, the twins Alex and Sam, were confirmed as orphans. Their parents had died in a car accident shortly after their disappearance was reported, leaving no extended family to claim them. The tragedy of their situation was compounded by the realization that their parents had died believing their children were already lost, never knowing that Alex and Sam were alive and suffering in an underground laboratory just hours away from where they were buried. Legal proceedings began immediately to provide permanent homes for the orphaned twins, with several families expressing interest in adoption. But every potential placement faced the same complex challenge. Each child showed profound reluctance to be separated from Thunder, and their emotional stability depended heavily on the German shepherd's continued presence. Isabella recognized that the children's need for continuity with Thunder was not just preference, but medical necessity. Their attachment to the dog was the foundation of their emotional recovery, and disrupting that bond could undo months of progress. She began exploring ways to maintain Thunder's involvement in their lives, regardless of their eventual placement. Her solution was both practical and deeply personal. Isabella petitioned the court to become a legal guardian for Alex and Sam, with Thunder as an integral part of their therapeutic support system. Her background as a veterinary technician, her connection to the case through her father's investigation, and her unique relationship with Thunder made her an ideal candidate to provide the specialized care these children required. The community of Millbrook rallied around the rescued children with a generosity that restored Isabella's faith in human goodness. Local businesses donated medical equipment, toys, and clothing. Residents organized fundraisers to support long-term care needs. Churches provided meals for families traveling to visit children in the hospital. The town that had been unknowingly harboring a horrific conspiracy transformed itself into a network of support for the innocent victims of that evil. But during a routine medical examination, 6 weeks after the rescue, Dr. Rodriguez discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about Angel's case. Advanced genetic testing revealed that the baby Thunder had first rescued possessed an unusual genetic marker that didn't match any of the other children, a modification that appeared to be artificially engineered rather than naturally occurring. This isn't natural genetic variation, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Isabella and federal investigators. Someone has deliberately altered this child's DNA. She's not just a victim of psychological experiments. She's the product of genetic manipulation. The discovery opened new questions that were both fascinating and terrifying. If Angel had been genetically modified, what was the purpose? Were there other children like her? How extensive was the conspiracy they had uncovered? Isabella looked at Thunder, whose amber eyes seemed to hold secrets that might never be fully revealed. They had rescued 7 children and exposed a major conspiracy, but Angel's genetic anomaly suggested that Project Silent Angel was just one part of a much larger, more sophisticated operation that combined psychological manipulation with cutting-edge genetic engineering. The children were safe, their healing had begun, and justice was being served to their abusers. The genetic testing results that Dr. Rodriguez received on a cold Thursday morning in December changed everything they thought they understood about Project Silent Angel. As she stared at the laboratory reports spread across her desk in the early dawn light, the implications of what she was reading made her hands tremble with a combination of scientific fascination and moral horror. Angel's DNA contained genetic markers that simply didn't occur in nature. Specific sequences had been deliberately inserted into her genome, modifications that appeared to enhance cognitive development, sensory appointment, processing, and most remarkably, the neural pathways associated with emotional regulation. This wasn't the result of random mutation or natural variation. This was the product of sophisticated genetic engineering, conducted on a developing human embryo. "This is impossible," Dr. Rodriguez whispered to herself, running the tests for the 3rd time to confirm results she desperately hoped were wrong. But the evidence was undeniable. Angel was the product of genetic modification that represented years of advanced research and development. Further investigation revealed that Angel's genetic profile matched theoretical models published in obscure scientific journals by Dr. Victoria Blackwell herself. Papers with innocuous titles like Theoretical Applications of Genetic Modification in Pediatric Neurological Development and Enhanced Cognitive Processing through Targeted DNA Manipulation contained the blueprint for exactly the modifications found in Angel's genome. The baby's accelerated development suddenly made terrifying sense. At just 2 months old, Angel displayed pattern recognition abilities that typically didn't emerge until 6 months of age. Her sensory processing was remarkably advanced. She could track multiple moving objects simultaneously, respond to subtle changes in light and sound, and showed coordination that suggested enhanced neural development. What Dr. Rodriguez had attributed to natural resilience was actually the result of systematic genetic enhancement. Thunder's behavior toward Angel took on new significance as well. The German Shepherd showed particular protectiveness toward the genetically modified baby, positioning himself as her primary guardian even among the other rescued children. His special attention suggested that he may have been specifically trained to identify and locate children who had been subjected to genetic modification, making him not just a witness to the conspiracy, but a specialized tool designed to track its most valuable products. The medical implications were staggering. Angel's genetic modifications appeared designed to create a child with enhanced intelligence and superior emotional control. Exactly the kind of individual that military or intelligence organizations might find valuable. The emotional suppression techniques used on the other children were crude psychological conditioning. But Ángel represented a more sophisticated approach that modified the biological basis for emotion itself. Isabella felt her protective instinct surge as she realized that Angel's unique status made her extraordinarily valuable to researchers who viewed human beings as experimental subjects. Unlike the other children, whose psychological conditioning could potentially be reversed through therapy and time, Angel's modifications were permanent protection protocols around Angel. Recognizing that her potential value to continuing research efforts made her a prime target for retrieval by hostile parties. The hospital's security was upgraded. Access to the pediatric ward was strictly limited, and Angel's medical information was classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The ethical questions surrounding Angel's care were unprecedented in medical literature. How do you provide appropriate treatment for a child whose genetic structure has been artificially modified? What are the long-term implications of genetic changes that have never been tested in human subjects? Most fundamentally, what rights does a genetically modified human being have? And who has the authority to make decisions about her future? Dr. Rodriguez found herself grappling with questions that belonged more in science fiction than pediatric medicine. Angel was thriving under their care, showing no adverse effects from her genetic modifications. But the long-term consequences were completely unknown. They were caring for what might be the first successfully genetically enhanced human being in history, and every decision they made would set precedents for challenges they couldn't even imagine. The baby who Thunder had rescued on that impossible night wasn't just a victim of child abuse. She was living proof that some researchers had successfully crossed ethical boundaries that most scientists considered inviolate. Angel represented both the promise and the terror of genetic modification technology. An innocent child who had been transformed into something unprecedented in human history. Isabella's discovery of her father's safety deposit box came through a letter that arrived 4 months after Angel's genetic modifications were revealed. A message that Michael Santos had arranged to be delivered only if specific conditions were met. The letter, mailed by an automated service he had arranged years earlier, contained a simple message. If you're reading this, then Angel has been found. Box 247, First National Bank, Millbrook. The key is where Thunder liked to hide his toys. The hiding place was achingly familiar. A loose floorboard in the bedroom closet where Thunder used to cache his favorite tennis balls when Isabella was a child. Beneath the board, wrapped in waterproof plastic, lay a safety deposit box key and documentation that revealed the true scope of her father's final investigation. The contents of the box painted a picture of a conspiracy that dwarfed everything they had discovered so far. Michael Santos's meticulously documented evidence showed that the Millbrook facility, though carefully obscured through layers of private contractors and research foundations. Michael's notes indicated that some aspects of the project had unofficial support from elements within military intelligence agencies interested in creating enhanced soldiers and operatives. The funding streams were complex and deliberately opaque, but the pattern suggested systematic government knowledge of and participation in human experimentation. Thunder's training records revealed the most shocking truth of all. The German Shepherd hadn't just been trained for standard police work. He had been specifically conditioned to identify children who had been subjected to genetic modification. His exceptional scent detection had been enhanced through specialized training that allowed him to recognize the unique chemical signatures produced by genetically altered human physiology. Thunder was never just a police dog, Isabella realized, reading through the detailed training logs. Dad was using him to hunt for genetically modified children. Michael Santos's last journal entries indicated that he had discovered Angel's location and was planning to expose the genetic modification aspect of Project Silent Angel when he was murdered. His notes showed that Angel wasn't just another victim. She was the proof of concept, the successful prototype that would validate years of theoretical research and unlock funding for expanded operations. The personal stakes of the investigation became clear as Isabella read her father's final entries. Michael Santos had known about Angel's special nature and had trained Thunder specifically to find and rescue her when the time was right. Thunder's 4-year wait in the forest hadn't been aimless survival. It had been patient preparation for a mission that Michael Santos had planned from beyond the grave. The conspiracy's scope was breathtaking. Military research into enhanced soldiers, private corporations developing intellectual property in human genetic modification, international scientific organizations sharing research data, and government agencies providing unofficial oversight and protection. Angel wasn't just the victim of child abuse. She was the product of a coordinated effort to advance human genetic modification regardless of ethical considerations or legal restrictions. Michael Santos's notes contained an ominous warning that proved prophetic. If the Millbrook operation is discovered, other sites will be activated. They'll move the research, accelerate the timeline, and eliminate evidence. Angel is the key to everything. Whoever controls her controls the future of human genetic modification. The first sign of new danger came in the form of legitimate corporate representatives making inquiries about Angel's medical care and legal status. Lawyers from biotechnology companies, pharmaceutical research firms, and private medical foundations began filing court documents claiming various forms of interest in Angel's case. Some argued that genetic modifications made her intellectual property of the research organizations that had created her. Others claimed that her enhanced capabilities required specialized care that only their facilities could provide. Legal challenges multiplied daily as attorneys representing unknown clients filed motions claiming parental rights, research ownership, or custody based on Angel's status as a genetically modified human being. The court system struggled to address questions that had never been contemplated in legal precedent. Could a genetically modified child be considered property? Who had legal authority over medical decisions for a being that was partially artificial? What rights did research organizations have over their genetic creations? Thunder's behavior became increasingly agitated as new threats emerged. The German Shepherd displayed heightened alertness that suggested he could sense dangers invisible to human perception. His protective positioning around Angel intensified, and he began showing stress behaviors that hadn't been present since their first days at the hospital. Something in his environment, scents, sounds, or subtle changes that only his enhanced training could detect, was triggering alarm responses. Security breaches confirmed Thunder's instincts. Attempted break-ins at the hospital occurred with increasing frequency, each more sophisticated than the last. Isabella's home was burglarized twice, with intruders clearly searching for specific information rather than valuable items. Surveillance equipment was discovered in locations where Angel received medical care, and security cameras captured unknown individuals conducting reconnaissance around any facility where she was present. Federal agents recommended relocating Angel and the other children to a secure federal facility designed to protect high-value witnesses and classified research subjects. The proposal included moving Angel to an underground complex in Colorado where she would receive specialized medical care while remaining completely isolated from potential threats. Isabella's resistance to the relocation plan was immediate and fierce. "You want to put her in another underground facility?" she argued with FBI agent Chen. "After everything these children have been through, you want to lock them away again?" Separating them from Thunder and their familiar environment could undo months of therapeutic progress. The conflict between security and healing created an impossible dilemma. Angel needed protection from hostile parties who viewed her as valuable property, but she also needed the emotional stability that came from Thunder's presence and familiar surroundings. The other children's recovery depended heavily on their connection to Thunder, and disrupting those bonds for security reasons could cause additional psychological trauma. Media coverage of the miracle baby brought unwanted national attention to Angel's case. News organizations competed to tell the story of the genetically modified child rescued by a dog who should have been dead, creating public interest that made covert operations more difficult, but also provided a form of protection through visibility. International interest in Angel's case escalated when intelligence agencies reported inquiries from foreign governments about the Millbrook discoveries. Scientific attachés from several countries had made informal requests for information about genetic modification techniques, while others had offered assistance with Angel's care that seemed motivated by research opportunities rather than humanitarian concerns. The culminating threat emerged during what should have been a routine visit. Isabella had brought Angel to see Thunder in the hospital's specialized visitation room, when both the baby and the dog suddenly became agitated. Angel, who had been playing contentedly, began crying with an intensity that spoke of genuine distress rather than normal infant fussiness. Thunder's response was immediate and alarming. He positioned himself protectively over Angel, while staring fixedly at the room's windows, his body rigid with threat assessment. Security cameras revealed the source of their distress. Armed figures were positioning themselves around the hospital building, moving with military precision and sophisticated equipment. Thermal imaging detected at least 8 individuals taking strategic positions that would allow them to breach the hospital's security and reach the pediatric ward where Angel was located. Someone was planning to take Angel by force, and Thunder's enhanced training had detected the threat before human security systems could identify it. The genetic modifications that made Angel so valuable had also made her the target of a coordinated extraction operation that threatened not just her safety, but the safety of everyone in the hospital. The deeper mystery of Angel's genetic modifications had attracted the attention of forces with resources and determination that matched the sophistication of her creation. The battle for control of the genetically enhanced child was about to begin, and the outcome would determine not just Angel's future, but the future of human genetic modification research. Thunder's protective stance over the baby he had risked everything to save sent a clear message. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The dog who had been declared dead, the investigator's daughter who had refused to give up, and the genetically modified child who represented both humanity's greatest scientific achievement and its greatest ethical failure, were about to discover just how far some people would go to control the future of human evolution. The first warning of danger didn't come from the hospital's high-tech systems, but from Thunder. Wasn't the bark of a dog sensing a stranger. It was the cry of a seasoned protector who had detected lethal intent. Security Officer James Wright checked the cameras and felt his blood run cold. 6 armed figures moved with military precision around the hospital, taking positions to control every exit. Black, unmarked SUVs blocked nearby streets. "Code Silver! Code Silver!" Wright announced over the intercom. Lockdown protocols engaged for the first time since the building opened. Barriers sealed. All entry funneled to one monitored checkpoint. FBI agents stationed at the hospital, since Angel's genetic modifications were uncovered, coordinated with local police to counter the threat. Medical staff rushed to secure the 7 rescued children. Luna, Marcus, David, twins, Alex and Sam, baby Angel, and 4-year-old Hope, deep inside the pediatric wing. FBI agent Chen ordered Isabella to evacuate, but she refused. "These children have been abandoned by every adult in their lives," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving them now." Dr. Rodriguez made the same choice, unwilling to desert her patients. Thunder planted himself at the main corridor's intersection, a choke point an attacker would have to cross to reach the children. His stance left no doubt nothing would pass him. Communications soon collapsed. Cell signals jammed, landlines cut, internal systems sabotaged. The hospital was isolated, surrounded by hostile forces. This wasn't a random attack. It was a professional extraction. The breach came fast. Shaped charges disabled locks, thermal imaging bypassed cameras, and coordinated movements cut through security like paper. Within minutes, they were in the building. Thunder launched into action. Trained to disable armed suspects, he went for weapon hands, used his weight to knock men off balance, and broke their formation. His resistance created chaos, slowing their advance. Isabella organized staff to build makeshift barricades, gurneys, medical carts, equipment, anything to delay the intruders. The children, instead of panicking, stayed close to Thunder and Isabella. Luna hugged Thunder's neck. Marcus whispered, "Protect Thunder." The twins guarded Angel's crib like sentinels. Thunder paid a heavy price: gashed shoulder, burns from repeated taser strikes, a limp from deeper injury. But he bought precious minutes. Hospital employees joined the defense. Nurses set up ambush points. Maintenance activated hidden barriers. Administrators recorded the attackers for evidence. Their demand confirmed everyone's fear. They wanted Angel into the city. Thunder's wounds were severe, but he stayed alert, watching over the children. The kids, showing remarkable emotional growth, worried over him and refused to be separated during treatment. The attack proved Isabella's choice to stay had been vital. Her calm steadied the children, preventing the emotional collapse that might have undone months of recovery. They'd learned some adults could be trusted to stand and fight for them. Federal authorities relocated the children under new identities with permanent protection. The syndicate's global reach meant they'd remain targets until the threat was dismantled. But as Thunder rested in recovery, his gaze kept returning to one corner of the room. Isabella checked and found a hidden camera in the ventilation grate, proof someone had been watching for days, gathering intel for the assault. The battle had been won, but the war over Angel's future had only begun. Thunder, battered but unbroken, knew his mission was far from over. The hidden camera in Thunder's recovery room was just the beginning. When FBI technicians swept St. Catherine's Hospital, they uncovered a sprawling surveillance network: cameras in patient rooms, microphones in consultation areas, and systems tracking every movement for years. The level of access and insider knowledge meant this wasn't the work of outside criminals. Someone in authority had built it. The trail led straight to hospital administrator Dr. Margaret Kane. Her private office housed the servers storing every feed. The woman who'd seemed merely nervous during the underground lab investigation was revealed as a longtime collaborator in Project Silent Angel, using her position to cover for its operations and feed intelligence to its backers. Thunder's behavior suddenly made sense, his agitation around Kane, his refusal to let her near the children, his watchful distrust. While humans had misread these as stress, the German Shepherd had been accurately assessing a threat from their first meeting. Financial records showed Kane had received substantial payments over 4 years, disguised as research grants and equipment purchases. Officer Michael Santos, Thunder's former partner, had identified her before his death. Notes hidden in his safety deposit box contained surveillance photos, money trails, and details of her suspicious behavior. The most chilling discovery: Kane had orchestrated Santos's assignment to the missing children cases, not to stop him, but to steer and eventually eliminate him when he got close. After Thunder's faked death, she used her access to monitor for his return, knowing he could expose her crimes. When he reappeared to rescue Angel, she moved immediately to have both eliminated. Her arrest was swift, but the betrayal rocked the institution. A woman sworn to protect patients had sold them for profit, turning her office into a command center that tracked the federal investigation. Revealed Project Silent Angel was only one node in a network spanning 12 countries. Each site specialized in different aspects of human enhancement: genetic modification, neurological implants, psychological conditioning, pharmaceutical engineering.
Angel represented the integration of all these fields into a single prototype.
Funding flowed through a labyrinth of biotech firms, defense contractors, and research institutions. Forensic accountants traced billions over 15 years, while agencies publicly denied involvement. Seized documents suggested elements in intelligence and military communities had quietly supported the work for strategic gain. Hundreds of children worldwide had been taken. Many didn't survive. Survivors were scattered across facilities, each phase refining the technology. The long-term goal wasn't isolated science. It was the systematic creation of enhanced individuals, to be placed in influential positions, reshaping society itself. Thunder's role was deliberate. Santos had trained him to find and protect Angel, knowing he might not live to see the mission through. His years in the wilderness were preparation for this exact moment. Even with arrests and shutdowns, the danger remained. Other cells had fled to countries with weak oversight, taking their expertise and blueprints with them. The technology that created Angel was still advancing. For Isabella, the victory felt incomplete. Angel and the other children were safe. Many conspirators faced justice, but the threat was alive elsewhere. The science could be replicated. New victims could be made. Thunder's age meant future rescues would fall to human investigators lacking his instincts. The children would grow up in a world where the same technology might return in more dangerous forms. The trials were historic. Prosecutors secured convictions for dozens of conspirators. Dr. Victoria Blackwell received multiple life sentences for crimes against children, murder, human trafficking, and international law violations, showing no remorse. Kane was sentenced to 40 years for conspiracy, murder, and corruption. Corporate executives faced decades in prison, their companies dismantled, fortunes seized, and civil penalties bankrupting the networks that had bankrolled the research. A federal compensation fund was created to provide lifetime care for all affected children, medical monitoring, psychological therapy, educational support, and financial assistance. Angel's genetic modifications qualified her for specialized care for life. Thunder received official commendations from the FBI, Department of Justice, and the President. At a White House ceremony, he became a national symbol of loyalty, courage, and the power of individual action against systemic evil. Isabella joined the FBI's Child Protection Unit, made her indispensable in complex cases. Medical research drawn from the children's recovery led to breakthroughs in trauma treatment. Protocols developed to reverse emotional suppression began helping other victims of systematic abuse. The children's resilience provided new insight into human psychological adaptation. Angel's future was carefully planned. Special education for her enhanced abilities, security to protect her from those who still saw her as property. Thunder remained at her side, offering stability no therapy could match. A memorial service honored Michael Santos and other victims, with Thunder standing as a living tribute. Families, law enforcement, and federal officials gathered in solidarity, recognizing the sacrifices made to expose and dismantle Project Silent Angel. The conspiracy had been crippled, but not destroyed. Somewhere, other children were still in cages, other angels still being built. And those who had once hidden behind hospital walls would try again. But as the legal proceedings concluded and life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, Isabella received a package that shattered any illusion that their victory had been complete. The package arrived with no return address, containing a photograph of children who looked remarkably similar to Angel. Young faces displaying the same enhanced cognitive alertness, the same genetically modified features that made Angel unique. The accompanying note was brief but chilling. Phase 2 is already complete. They're waiting. The photograph showed at least 12 children, ranging in age from toddlers to preteens, all displaying characteristics that suggested successful genetic modification. They were dressed in normal clothing, playing in what appeared to be a typical playground, but their faces held the same unusual intelligence that marked Angel as different from normal children. Isabella stared at the photograph with growing horror, understanding that Project Silent Angel hadn't been ended, it had been evolved. Somewhere in the world, other facilities had continued the research, perfected the techniques, and created a new generation of genetically modified children who were already being integrated into society. Thunder, now resting peacefully beside Angel's crib, opened his amber eyes and looked at Isabella with an expression that seemed to understand the implications of what she had discovered. His mission to protect Angel was continuing, but the scope of the threat they faced had just expanded beyond anything they had previously imagined. The battle for Angel's freedom had been won, but the war for the future of human genetic modification was from defeat adapted to exposure and possessed resources that spanned the globe. Thunder's legacy of loyalty and protection would need to inspire a new generation of investigators, because the children in the photograph deserved the same chance at freedom that Angel had received. The German shepherd who had emerged from the dead to expose one conspiracy had proven that individual courage could triumph over systematic evil. But as Isabella looked at the faces of children who needed rescue, She realized that Thunder's example would need to be replicated many times over if they were going to save them all. 1 year after Thunder's dramatic rescue of Angel and the exposure of Project Silent Angel, the small house on Maple Street had been transformed into something Michael Santos could never have imagined when he lived there with his young daughter. Isabella had successfully created a household that accommodated both Thunder's needs as an aging working dog and Angel's requirements as a genetically enhanced child whose development continued to amaze everyone who witnessed it. The rescued children had made remarkable progress in their development, each achieving milestones that seemed impossible during those first dark days in the hospital. Luna, the 3-year-old who had been the first to cry naturally, was now speaking in full sentences and attending a specialized preschool program designed for children recovering from severe trauma. Marcus, whose emotional suppression had been the most severe, was learning to read with enthusiasm that delighted his reunited mother. The twins, Alex and Sam, had been successfully adopted by a family with experience in therapeutic parenting, and their new parents reported that both boys were thriving in an environment that provided security without triggering their trauma responses. Angel, now 18 months old, displayed intelligence and emotional awareness that went far beyond normal developmental expectations, while maintaining the special bond with Thunder that had been the foundation of her recovery. Her genetic modifications had given her cognitive abilities that were remarkable but not overwhelming. She understood complex concepts, recognized patterns that escaped adult observation, and demonstrated problem-solving skills that suggested her enhanced intelligence was developing along healthy lines. Thunder, now 13 years old, showed the inevitable signs of aging that came with his advanced years and the accumulated stress of his time hiding in Millbrook Forest. His once dark coat was silver around the muzzle, his powerful frame had grown leaner with age, and arthritis in his joints made his movements slower and more deliberate. But his amber eyes remained alert and intelligent, his protective instincts undiminished by physical limitations, and his devotion to Angel absolute. Isabella had legally adopted Angel through proceedings that required federal oversight due to the child's unique genetic status. The adoption was complicated by questions that had never been addressed in family law. What rights did genetically modified individuals have? Who could make medical decisions for enhanced children? And how should society handle the legal status of beings who were partially artificial? But Isabella's commitment to Angel's welfare, combined with Thunder's obvious approval of the arrangement, had convinced the courts that this unconventional family could provide the stability and protection that Angel needed. The other 5 children had found their own paths to healing and integration. David had been reunited with grandparents who had never stopped searching for him, while Hope had been adopted by a family specifically trained to handle children with her particular therapeutic needs. Each placement had been carefully evaluated to ensure that the children's unique requirements could be met while allowing them to develop as normally as possible. Therapeutic success was measured not just in clinical assessments, but in the small everyday moments that proved the children's humanity had survived their systematic abuse. They laughed at silly jokes, cried when they were hurt, showed affection to caregivers, and displayed curiosity about the world around them, all behaviors that their conditioning had been designed to eliminate. Most remarkably, all the children showed normal emotional responses and had overcome most effects of their early trauma through the combination of professional therapy, loving care, and the security provided by knowing they were safe. Millbrook had embraced the rescued children as symbols of hope and resilience, with the community providing ongoing support that went far beyond what any government program could have offered. Local businesses contributed resources, residents volunteered time and expertise, and the town had effectively adopted all the children as their own. The conspiracy that had hidden beneath their small community for years had been replaced by a network of protection and care that demonstrated humanity at its best. Thunder's daily routine reflected his unwavering commitment to Angel's protection despite his advancing age. Each morning, he would position himself where he could observe Angel during her breakfast, his alert presence providing security while she explored the world with her enhanced curiosity. Throughout the day, he would move to maintain visual contact with her, adjusting his position as she played, napped, or engaged in the educational activities that Isabella had designed to nurture her remarkable abilities without overwhelming her developing personality. The bond between Angel and Thunder had deepened into something that seemed almost mystical to outside observers. The genetically enhanced child and the aging German shepherd communicated through subtle cues that spoke of profound mutual understanding, with each seeming to anticipate the other's needs and emotional states. Angel would Thunder his favorite toys when he seemed restless, while Thunder would position himself to provide comfort when Angel showed signs of distress or overstimulation. Isabella's work with the FBI's Child Protection Unit had expanded far beyond the original Project Silent Angel investigation, uncovering additional sites and victims of similar projects worldwide that painted a disturbing picture of systematic human experimentation on a global scale. Her unique experience with genetically modified children and trained detection animals made her invaluable in investigations that spanned multiple countries and involved technologies that most law enforcement agencies were unprepared to handle. The mysterious photograph that had arrived after the legal proceedings concluded had led to the discovery of a second generation of genetically modified children who were more advanced than Angel. Intelligence reports indicated that the organizations behind Project Silent Angel had learned from their exposure and had refined their techniques to create enhanced individuals who could pass more easily in normal society while retaining the cognitive and emotional modifications that made them valuable. Global intelligence agencies had identified a sophisticated international organization that continued the research under different guises, operating in countries where government oversight was minimal or where official cooperation could be obtained through financial or political influence. The network spanned continents with facilities in Asia, Africa, and South America that were conducting experiments that made Project Silent Angel seem primitive by comparison. Thunder's instincts, despite his age, continued to display unusual alertness that suggested he sensed ongoing threats that human intelligence couldn't detect. His behavior patterns would change when certain visitors approached the house, when unfamiliar vehicles passed through the neighborhood, or when surveillance activities increased in their area. Isabella had learned to trust Thunder's assessments, understanding that his enhanced training and natural abilities provided early warning of dangers that conventional security measures might miss. Angel's accelerated growth and developing abilities made her both a miracle of genetic science and an increasingly valuable target for organizations seeking to continue their research. Her genetic modifications were stable and successful, providing a template that could be studied, replicated, and improved upon for future enhancement projects. Federal protection remained in place for both Angel and Isabella, with Thunder serving as an additional layer of security whose presence deterred casual observation while providing immediate threat detection. Legitimate scientists studying Angel's genetic modifications had begun developing treatments for genetic disorders, finding positive applications for technology that had been created for exploitative purposes. Her enhanced cognitive development provided insights into neurological function that advanced the treatment of autism, learning disabilities, and developmental delays, while her emotional stability offered clues to addressing anxiety and mood disorders. The technology that had been used to abuse her was being transformed into tools for healing others. medical and legal communities continued to grapple with the implications of genetic modification and the rights of enhanced individuals, as more cases emerged worldwide. Angel's legal status as both a genetically modified being and a normal child created precedents that influenced how society would handle future instances of human genetic enhancement, while her successful development proved that enhanced individuals could function normally in society when provided with appropriate care and protection. The ongoing threat remained real and immediate. Intelligence reports suggested that Phase 2 of the enhancement program had produced dozens of genetically modified children who were being integrated into society with carefully constructed identities and placement in families who might not even know about their enhanced capabilities. These children were designed to be sleeper agents of sorts, appearing normal while possessing capabilities that could be activated or utilized by their creators when the time was right. Isabella understood that their victory in exposing Project Silent Angel had been significant but incomplete. Angel was safe and thriving, but other enhanced children remained in situations where they could be exploited, studied, or used for purposes that violated their fundamental rights as human beings. The international nature of the conspiracy meant that new threats could emerge from any direction, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation to stay ahead of organizations with unlimited resources and flexible ethics. 3 years later, Thunder, at 16 years old, had settled into a peaceful routine that reflected both his advancing age and his complete trust in the security that surrounded Angel and their small family. The German shepherd spent his days in comfortable spots throughout the house, always positioned where he could observe Angel, who had grown into a bright, loving 4-year-old, whose enhanced intelligence was balanced by normal childhood curiosity and affection. Angel and Thunder shared what could only be described as an almost telepathic connection, with the little girl often anticipating Thunder's needs before he expressed them, and the aging dog responding to her emotions with comfort and security that no human caregiver could have provided. When Angel was excited about a new discovery, Thunder would become alert and engaged, sharing her enthusiasm. When she was tired or overwhelmed, Thunder would position himself nearby, providing the calm stability that helped her process complex emotions and experiences. Isabella watched their relationship with wonder and gratitude, understanding that her father's sacrifice and Thunder's loyalty had created something beautiful from the tragedy that had cost so many lives. The bond between the genetically enhanced child and the aging police dog represented the triumph of love and protection over systematic exploitation, proving that even the most sophisticated evil could be overcome by simple dedication to protecting the innocent. Angel seemed to understand Thunder's special role in her life with remarkable clarity for such a young child, often telling visitors and new friends that Thunder saved me, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone stating an obvious truth. Her awareness of her own unique nature was developing gradually, with Isabella carefully explaining her genetic modifications in age-appropriate ways that emphasized her specialness without creating feelings of isolation or difference. The end came peacefully, on a spring morning when Thunder was 17 years old. He had been showing signs of slowing down for weeks, sleeping more, eating less, moving with the careful deliberation of a body that had served faithfully for many years. On his final night, Thunder positioned himself beside Angel's bed, as he had every night for years. But this time he didn't wake up when she called his name the next morning. Angel's tears at Thunder's passing were the first truly deep emotions she had displayed since her rescue, showing her complete emotional recovery through the profound grief she felt at losing her protector and closest friend. Her sobs were heartbreaking but healthy, the natural response of a child who had learned to love deeply and who understood that loss was part of the human experience. Thunder was buried next to Michael Santos in Millbrook's small cemetery, with Angel placing flowers on both graves and solemnly promising to remember everything in a voice that carried wisdom beyond her years. The ceremony drew hundreds of people, FBI agents who had worked the case, medical staff who had witnessed the children's recovery, community members who had supported the family, and law enforcement officers from around the country who came to honor a K-9 officer whose final mission had saved innocent lives and exposed systematic evil. Isabella continued her work with the FBI's Child Protection Unit, traveling internationally to investigate cases involving enhanced children and sophisticated trafficking operations, while raising Angel to understand her unique gifts and the responsibilities that came with them. As Angel grew older, she began expressing desire to help other children who had experienced trauma, suggesting that Thunder's legacy of protection would continue through the child he had died defending. The story came full circle 12 years later, when Angel, now 16 years old and possessing intelligence that astounded everyone who worked with her, joined Isabella in investigating a facility in Eastern Europe that built upon the technology that had created her. Working together, they rescued 15 children and dismantled an operation that had been expanding the enhancement program into new territories. As they stood in the doorway of the rescue facility, watching medical teams care for children who had endured experiences similar to Angel's own early trauma, Isabella realized that Thunder's mission had never truly ended. The German shepherd who had emerged from supposed death to rescue a baby had set in motion a legacy of protection that continued to save innocent lives years after his sacrifice. Angel, now a young woman whose genetic enhancements had developed into remarkable capabilities for pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking, had become exactly what Thunder and Michael Santos had died protecting. A force for justice and compassion who used her unique abilities to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. The mission that had begun with Thunder's impossible journey through the hospital doors on that cold Monday night continued through the child he had saved, carrying forward the message that love, loyalty, and unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent could triumph over any form of systematic evil. Thunder's legacy lived on in every child they rescued, every conspiracy they exposed, and every victory of hope over despair. The German shepherd who had been declared dead had proven that some bonds transcend death itself, and that the greatest protection comes not from sophisticated technology or overwhelming force, but from the simple determination to never abandon those who need defending. Thunder's story had ended, but his mission was eternal, carried forward by those who remembered that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs and speak through actions rather than words. Thunder's story reminds us of something we dog lovers have always known deep in our hearts. The bond between humans and dogs transcends simple companionship. It becomes something sacred, something that can literally save lives and change the world. German shepherds, like Thunder, embody loyalty in its purest form. They don't just live alongside us. They dedicate their entire beings to protecting what matters most to us. That intelligence in their eyes, that unwavering devotion, that instinct to guard and serve. These aren't just breed characteristics. They're expressions of a love so profound it requires no words. Every dog owner has felt glimpses of what Isabella and Angel experienced with Thunder. Those moments when your dog seems to understand exactly what you need, when they comfort you without being asked, when they position themselves between you and perceived danger. That's the magic of the human-animal connection. If Thunder's story has stirred something in your heart about your own four-legged family member, you might find it meaningful to explore ways to deepen that bond. Sometimes, personality and needs can unlock even more of that special connection we all treasure. After all, every dog deserves to be understood as deeply as they understand us.